Let's talk Miami.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, on today's show, we are talking all things Miami Hurricanes because Syracuse Football takes on Miami at home this Saturday at 3:30 in the final regular season game of the season for both squads. This is a very important game for Miami specifically, also for Syracuse, but tangibly speaking, for Miami. We're going to go over an overview of their season, talk about their offense, their defense, and the keys for Syracuse to hopefully pull off an upset victory. Before we get to all of that, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the finale, the final regular season game on Syracuse football schedule. We've all seen it coming. The schedule's been out for quite a while that the Orange were going to take on the Miami Hurricanes at home to close the year. And folks, I think we're in for a treat. Let's start right there. This could be an amazing game. I cannot wait for it. For the Miami fans who happen to stumble upon this podcast here, because we're going to talk a lot about the Miami Hurricanes, first of all, welcome. I just want to give you guys a fair warning. This is a Syracuse podcast, and I'm going to do my best to show respect to Miami because they're certainly a really, really good team, and also go over several key players. If I miss someone, I apologize, but just remember, this is a Syracuse podcast. But hey, it's maybe not so bad to hear from another side, right? All right, let's talk about Miami and their season so far. Just a little bit of a brief overview, then we'll get into their offense. Miami is 10-1. That's pretty good, right? 10-1? I would say that's pretty good. 10-1. They're led by head coach Mario Cristobal, and Miami needs to win this game. They have to win. If they win this game, they're going to play for the ACC championship against SMU. If they lose, well, Clemson earns its spot in the ACC title game. Miami controls its own fate right here. They must win this game. And it also has playoff implications too. Not for Syracuse. I don't think 9-3 Syracuse has a chance to get in. But Miami, if they lose, they're 10-2. It's possible the committee can leave them out. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible. So this is a really, really important game for Miami. And they've established themselves, at least to this point, as a legitimate national title contender. I wouldn't consider them the favorites, so to speak. I think that's reserved for teams like Ohio State and Oregon. I think those are the two best teams in the country. But Miami is perhaps in that second tier of, hey, I think they can win the national title. I don't think that they are the clear-cut best two right now, but who knows? If they're in the playoff, maybe they do make a run. This is a really, really good Miami Hurricanes team. Obviously, their record indicates it, but this is kind of the year where Miami has put it all together. They have always had talent. They've always gotten 4- and 5-star recruits. They typically get good transfers. But finally this season, it all came together. Let's talk about their offense. Their offense is the number one total offense in the country, averaging over 540 yards per game. Syracuse quite literally has not and will not play a tougher offense than the one on Saturday in the Miami Hurricanes. The reason why I say will not is because there's a bowl game. They won't face an offense quite like Miami in that bowl game. It's just not going to happen. This is going to be the toughest challenge for this Syracuse defense all season long because across the board, Miami's elite. Good to elite at every single position. Let's start with the quarterback. That's the game's most important position. You got a Heisman caliber QB in Cam Ward. He could be a top 10 pick in the upcoming NFL draft. I hope the New York Jets get him. I'm a New York Jets fan. I really hope they do. Miami Hurricanes probably don't want that to happen because if he goes to the Jets, that means he's going to suck. If he goes to any other team, he'll probably be good. But hey, maybe he can turn around the Jets. Who knows? But he is really, really good. He's currently third on FanDuel right now in Heisman voting, only behind Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty. He's not going to win the award in all likelihood because he's still third. But hey, that's pretty good. Miami is an exceptionally good team led by Cam Ward, who can basically do everything. I don't think there's really a weakness in his game. He's pretty mobile. He can make all sorts of throws. He might be the best quarterback in the country right now. For what it's worth, if Syracuse doesn't get any pressure on him, which it's kind of hard to get pressure on him because if you look up Miami's stats on offense, they only give up about 2 sacks per game. Their offensive line is pretty good too. If they don't get pressure on Cam Ward, it's going to be a long afternoon for Syracuse. But look, they're not just a team that just chucks the ball 40, 50 times every single game. That's kind of like Syracuse. That's what Syracuse does, if we're being honest with ourselves. Miami doesn't just throw. They got 3 exceptionally talented running backs. Damian Martinez is their lead back, but they also have Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle. All of them are capable of doing damage. Each of them average at least 5.5 yards per carry. Jordan Lyle, by the way, is at 8.6 yards per carry. He only has about 40 rushes this season, but in those limited number of attempts, he averages nearly a first down per run. So they got a Heisman caliber quarterback and they got 3 running backs who can all do damage on you. It's kind of like a pick your poison offense. I'm paying them a lot of respect for good reason. This is the number 1 total offense in the entire country. It does not get better than this. The ingredients are all there. You got a good offensive line. You got a good running game. You got a Heisman caliber quarterback. How about their weapons? Let's talk about their weapons. I think they got at least 5 legitimate outside threats. Xavier Restrepo. What a great name, by the way. He leads the Canes in every receiving metric, and by that I mean the Triple Crown. Yards, catches, touchdowns. He had, I believe, 1,000 yards last season. He's their slot guy. He's kind of like their Trevor Pena. He is really good. Xavier Restrepo, keep your eye on him. They also got Jacoby George, Isaiah Horton, and Sam Brown to round out the receiving corps. All are exceptionally talented as well. Then you got Elijah Arroyo, who is a monster at tight end. Every time I've tuned into a Miami Hurricanes game, that guy is making a play. Every time. Because he's 6'4", 245 pounds. He's going to be a matchup problem for Syracuse. It's not that any of their other guys aren't going to be matchup problems. But has Syracuse, correct me if I'm wrong, Syracuse fans, have we gone up against an elite tight end this season? Have we really have our linebackers and our other secondary players really been tested quite like this? I don't think so. Maybe I'm overselling Elijah Arroyo, but he's a monster at tight end at 6'4", 245. He can catch passes. He can run routes. He's going to be a threat in the red zone. If you're Syracuse, what's the idea? It's kind of like it's a pick your poison type offense. And there's a reason why later on this week on Friday for the Poll Friday, I asked the question, how many points will Syracuse need to score to win this game? And I'll spoil it for you a little bit right now. It's going to have to be a lot. Because I don't know how Syracuse's defense is going to stop this offense. I'll repeat myself one more time. The Miami Hurricanes average 540 total yards per game. That is number 1 in the country. Not just the ACC, in the entire country. This is the best offense in college football. They got 5 guys on the outside that can beat you. They got 3 talented running backs. And they got a good offensive line and a Heisman caliber quarterback. everything you would want in an offense. That is the Miami Hurricanes team overview this season so far. Again, they must win this game for the ACC title. If not, Clemson will go to the ACC title to play SMU. We also talked about their offense, which it's elite. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about the Miami Hurricanes defense. Basketball season is in full swing, and whether it's the NBA or college, like, hey, going to Syracuse basketball games, right? They're always pretty exciting, and the way I get tickets for games is by using Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And my favorite feature is the curated deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. This is Locked On Syracuse, and I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are covering all things Miami Hurricanes because Syracuse and Miami square off in the Dome Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. It's the final game of the regular season, and we know the stakes by now. Miami, they got to win this game for ACC title implications, but also potentially college football playoff implications. And for Syracuse, well, while nothing tangible is at stake, getting that 9th win and potentially the 10th win in a bowl game, I think is a pretty big deal. Now, we already talked about an overview of Miami's season. We talked about their offense as well, which is the best offense in the entire nation. So let's talk about the defense of Miami, which by default, it is the weaker of the two units. It has to be, unless it was also number one in the country, right? Miami, in theory, they don't. But in theory, they could have the number 2 total defense in the country, and it would still technically be considered the weaker of the two units because the offense is so good. Now, having said that, their defense is kind of gettable. If you're a Syracuse fan, myself included, this is what kind of gives yourself a little bit of hope that there is a chance of an upset because you know Miami's defense is not elite. I'll give you the numbers in a second because they're actually pretty good in terms of their totality of the year, but we know they are gettable. They are coming off a fantastic defensive performance against Wake Forest. I think even Hurricanes fans will agree with me on this. Syracuse is a better team than Wake Forest. Better offensively, at least. So take that for what it's worth. But prior to Wake, Miami had allowed at least 28 points in a game in 5 of their previous 6. Okay, 28 points is the equivalent of 4 touchdowns. That's a lot in 5 of their past 6 prior to Wake Forest. And the thing is that one exception, guys, it came against Florida State. Does that even count? Does that count? I would argue no, because I don't think Florida State's a team. I think they're just a collection of players. Sorry, I have to take a roast now. I had to take a dig at Florida State because they suck so much. So Miami's defense, at least prior to Wake Forest, had been pretty gettable. We'll see if that can continue against Syracuse. But I mentioned off the top that their totality for the season is actually pretty good. And that's the funny thing about Miami's defense. And it's the funny thing about defense in college football in general. There's just less of it than it is, say, in the NFL. Miami is the number 1 total defense in the ACC. I actually couldn't believe it when I looked it up this morning. I was like, what? Number 1? Really? But they do. They have the number 1 total defense in the ACC. And they have the number 4 scoring defense in the ACC. Again, I had to look at that again and say, really? It's not that we're feeding you a false narrative about Miami's defense. It's that I think that's just the reality of college football. There's just less defense in college football than there is in the NFL. And it's really about how much can you really hold down the opponent rather than actually stopping the opponent. Does that make sense? Now, Miami does have elite players on defense too. Don't get me wrong. I'll spotlight 3 of them, and trust me, if you're a Miami fan and you're watching or listening to this podcast, please, I guess this is my way of saying, please do not go crazy if I don't mention a top player of Miami. I apologize. But for Syracuse fans, these are 3 players that I think that you should definitely know heading into this game on Saturday. Number 1, Rueben Bain. Rueben Bain on the defensive line, nicknamed Hurricane Bain. He is elite in the run game, and he's elite in the pass game. My guess of what Miami is going to do is they are going to implement the candy bar strategy. Now, I have said this before on the podcast, but it's a new term that I just learned actually from John Gruden, watching a YouTube video from him. What does candy bar strategy mean? It means this. You're a defensive lineman, and you're moving around the D line, searching for the best matchup. Does that make sense? You're on the defensive line, you're searching through the best matchup, and then eventually you find it, and you just keep attacking the mismatch. That's, I think, what they're going to do with Rueben Bain. They're going to implement the candy bar strategy where I can see him going across the line, finding the best matchup for him, and just attacking him. So if you're Syracuse, I don't care which lineman you are, you better be ready for Rueben Bain because he is their best maybe run defender and pass rusher. Simeon Burrow, he's also really good too. Also on the defensive line, a transfer from Michigan State. He leads the Miami Hurricanes with 5.5 sacks. Here's the deal for Syracuse. You're going to have to hold up in protection. I know we say that about every game, but it could simply come down to who generates the most pressure on the quarterback. These are 2 elite quarterbacks. These are 2 of among the best quarterbacks in the entire country. They are actually 1-2 in the nation in passing yards. This matchup could very well come down to which offensive line performs better. Which offensive line can keep their quarterback upright? Because with Burrow and Bain on that defensive line for Miami, they can wreak havoc. And we saw for Syracuse what happened when they played against Pitt. Wasn't pretty when that defensive line got in McCord's face. So keep your eye on those guys on the defensive line for Miami. And then finally, there's Mishael Powell in the secondary. He's a cornerback, a Washington transfer. He leads the Miami Hurricanes with 5 interceptions this season. And the thing about Powell is last week, he had an amazing pick 6. It was an incredible play where he read a receiver screen, jumped the route, and then took it like over 70 yards the other way for a pick 6. It was in the second quarter. It was a tremendous play by Powell. So that's another guy you should keep an eye on for Syracuse. All right, so those are the 3 players, Rueben Bain, Simeon Burrow, and Mishael Powell. If I'm missing anyone, feel free to let me know. Those are just 3 that I spotlighted that Syracuse certainly has to keep their eye on. All right, so we talked about Miami as a team. We talked about their offense. We talked about their defense. And quite frankly, with their defense, even though obviously it's not as good as their offense, and even though we say it's gettable, they're still pretty good. Coming up, what are the keys for Syracuse to win this game? Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Syracuse Football is a 10.5-point home underdog against Miami on Saturday. Their money line is currently at plus 300. What do you think of those odds? Well, that's up for you to decide on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And on today's show, we are talking all things Miami Hurricanes because Syracuse and Miami square off in the Dome this Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. I have given you guys an overview of Miami's season. I talked about their elite offense. I talked about their defense and their key players. And now it's time to get to the keys for Syracuse in order to potentially pull off an upset, which I said during the break is a 10.5-point spread right now in favor of Miami. I think there are two keys, and they're relatively simple. All right, let's start off with the first one for Syracuse in order to win. They have to win the turnover battle. Miami's offense is going to be really hard to stop. And I think no matter what, they're going to get their yards. In fact, I would be really surprised if Miami doesn't put up at least 400 total yards of offense. Given that they average 540 for the entire season, 400 isn't even a lot for them. They can do 400 in their sleep. So I'd be very surprised if they don't hit that mark on Saturday. So for Syracuse, what do you need to do? You need to turn the ball over, or force turnovers, I should say. You need to force turnovers because the less opportunities that Miami has to score is the less points they can actually score. It's that simple. I want you to think of it like this, okay? Let's say Syracuse wins the turnover battle by 2. That could be a 28-point swing. Think of it for a moment. You win it by 2, that's 28 points potentially swinging. Because you get 2 extra possessions, you can score 2 touchdowns. However, if you don't turn them over twice, then Miami could have those 2 possessions and score 2 touchdowns. It's a 28-point swing. And yeah, sure, in any football game, it's important to win the turnover battle. But when you're going up against an explosive offense like Miami, you need to maximize the amount of possessions that you have. And the only way to do that is to win the turnover battle. It's that simple. So that's the number one key. You got to win the turnover battle. They got to find a way to do it. Number 2, touchdowns, touchdowns, touchdowns. That's right. Folks, field goals are not an option. Nope, I'm sorry. Unless it is end of half, like we saw against UConn, where they had to settle for that 51-yarder. There was no time on the clock. That I get. But unless it's an end of half, end of game, potentially, or it is 4th and a mile long, like it's 4th and 15 or whatever, and you have to settle for the field goal. Those are the only exceptions. Other than that, no field goals. No thank you. Because you're not going to win this game kicking field goals. I've given you guys the numbers of Miami's offense. I'm sorry, but if Syracuse gets into the red zone and it's 4th and 5, you got to go for it. You got to be ultra aggressive. Think about what UConn did to Syracuse on Saturday. Think about it for a second. They went for it in their own territory on a 4th and 1 in the second quarter, down 7 points. You know why they did that? They were rewarded. They got a 71-yard touchdown from that, and we talked about that on the podcast in the postgame. But why did they go for it? Because UConn knew. UConn knew that they could not stop the Syracuse offense. They had no choice. So what I'm saying for Syracuse is touchdowns, touchdowns, touchdowns. Field goals are not an option. If you have a chance to go for it instead of punting, do it. If it's 4th and 1 at your own 30, I don't care if it's early in the game. I'm fine with rolling the dice. I'm fine with it. Because Miami's going to get their yards. They're going to get their points. And we'll talk about on Friday how many points I think Syracuse needs to score in order to win this game. But the bottom line is this: touchdowns, touchdowns, touchdowns. There is no room for being conservative. Fran Brown, this is your chance to be ultra aggressive and have me not criticize you. How about that? Because normally I'm very conservative when it comes to playing football. I would rather you take the points. I would rather you punt if it's early in the game. Not against Miami. Sometimes the situation and the team changes a strategy. And that's the case with a team like the Miami Hurricanes. Plus, let's say Syracuse does settle for field goals. Like they decide not to be super duper aggressive. Well, it's not like the Orange have an All-American kicker. They don't. I mean, Jackson Kennedy, he hit all of his tries against Cal, which was nice. And then last week against UConn, what do you go, 1 for 3? Missed a 36-yarder. It's not like you have an All-American there, so you can't necessarily rely on, even if you settle for the points, you might not get the points. That's number one. And like I just said on number two, Miami's offense is going to move the ball anyway. Make them settle for field goals. Syracuse needs to score touchdowns. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, there could be another mini podcast coming up. I like doing those mini podcasts. Leave a comment in the comment section below your thoughts on them. They really work well with it when it comes to recruiting and all the rumors with them. By the way, the Caleb Singleton ones are heating up. There's, I think, more predictions now for it to happen. That would be a very nice step for Syracuse. But we do have more concrete news. The other day, Syracuse Football landed another 2025 football commit, D'Angelo Thompson. So I'm not going to make any promises or guarantees, but there could be a mini podcast there. Perhaps, again, I am not going to make a promise on this one. Perhaps there will be a full podcast coming about the two quarterbacks, Tom McCord and Cam Ward. Definitely tomorrow, there will be a full post-game reaction podcast to Syracuse basketball. They are playing Cornell tomorrow. So you have at least that to look forward to. Concrete, set in stone. And before I sign off, I do want to say this as well. ACC squad, you know how it's normally on Thursday? Well, in case you don't know, there's this big holiday on Thursday. It's called Thanksgiving. So the powers above me have decided that ACC squad this week will be on Wednesday. So if you want the news as to when that is going to drop, I don't know exactly when, but you will hear the news from me of when I know it's getting released at Locked On Syracuse on Twitter. It is at LO_Syracuse. The link is in the description below. You can follow right there, and I will tell you when ACC squad comes out. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And I will see you all tomorrow.